As of now, we have looked at the United Nations organization in detail. We saw its formation, we understood its structure, and we also saw its various functions. We also looked at the six principal organs of the United Nations and got to know about the United Nations system itself. Till now, we have clearly realized the primary aim, the major reason as to why the United Nations was formed in the first place was to maintain world peace. Now, how is this world peace to be maintained? It is through the methods of cooperation, deliberation, and dialogue, and essentially in maintaining and establishing peaceful and friendly relations between nations. This is primarily the political objective of the United Nations to avoid or prevent war and to establish peace. But the aim of United Nations does not end there. In fact, the very charter of the United Nations tells us that the United Nations also aims to improve the socio-economic conditions of people all over the world. In fact, the United Nations finds this particular aim to be a crucial portion of its overall objective of maintaining peace around the world. So, who do you think is there when children are displaced during a war? It is the United Nations itself. Who do you think is there to reduce the burden on people's life during an ongoing pandemic? It is, of course, the United Nations once again. And who do you think is there to save an important historical monument which falls in a war zone? It's again United Nations. Therefore, we understand that the United Nations ambit of maintaining world peace goes beyond just doing it in a political manner. But do you not think that this distracts the United Nations from its original aim, which is to maintain peace and security by avoiding war? Why is it that the United Nations follows such a dual objective? Let's see that now. The reason why the United Nations follows a dual objective of not only maintaining peace all around the world through political methods but also by enhancing the social and economic development of people around the world is because the founders of the United Nations learned from history. You must remember that the United Nations replaced the erstwhile League of Nations. Now, the League of Nations was formed with a very political objective in mind to bring the nations together to simply prevent war. It was only to be a forum of political cooperation. The only things it was concerned with was the rise of different powers and how to stop them. The League of Nations did this while ignoring the widespread hunger and poverty which was mostly rampant in Europe, and also how the entire economy of the world collapsed after the Great Depression. These were not important issues for the League of Nations because it felt that in the end peace is still maintained. There is no war. But peace is simply not the mere absence of war. Thus, we see that the reluctance of the League of Nations and its failure to deal with the socio-economic and the cultural problems of the people in the interwar period is what eventually led to a rise of dictators and totalitarian ideologies, which in the end led to the Second World War. So much for maintaining world peace. The United Nations wanted to avoid the failures of its predecessor. It did not want to turn a blind eye when literally children were put up for sale, especially during the Great Depression period, which the United Nations wanted to learn from the mistakes of its predecessor. It did not want to turn a blind eye to situations where even children were put up for sale, because that is how bad the Great Depression became during the interwar period. The United Nations wanted to be better. And thus, the United Nations did not want to be reluctant with the socio-economic and cultural problems of the people. Quite simply put, the realization which the United Nations had during the time of its formation can be put forward by a quote by Jawaharlal Nehru himself, where he says that peace is not merely the absence of war, it is a state of mind. Merely achieving peace is not enough. One also has to preserve it. Now, while the United Nations did achieve the establishment of peace, to maintain it, it truly had to preserve it. And simply avoiding war is not enough for preservation. That has to be done by enhancing the socio-economic and cultural environment of the people, because the people are the ones who can maintain peace. That is why the United Nations realize that the maintenance of world peace is simply not possible by politically avoiding war. It also needs to be done by socio-economic and cultural enhancement of the environment of people, because peace that is achieved needs to be preserved. This is the reason why United Nations has a dual purpose. In fact, the very concept of peace is very different for the United Nations. The United Nations, through the preamble of its charter, clearly states its fate in recognizing the fundamental human person. Thus, the concept of peace for United Nations is not just peace between nations, it's also peace within nations. And within the nations exists the fundamental human persons. And the United Nations recognizes that it's up to the people to bring a change, and it's up to the people to preserve peace. And to ensure that the peace is maintained by the people, the socio-economic and cultural environment needs to be enhanced and preserved. And that is the role of the United Nations. Now that we understood the socio-economic role of the United Nations, how does it justify this role? Is it through the General Assembly, or is it through the Security Council? Well, in reality, most of these socio-economic and cultural roles are put into action by the various specialized agencies of the United Nations. Let us now see what these specialized agencies are. Well, the United Nations has 18 specialized agencies and 14 major programs and funds for socio-economic development and human welfare. We can see some of these agencies and programs in this particular chart, such as UNDP, UNESCO, UNHCR, World Health Organization, World Trade Organization, UN Habitat, WIPO, UN Women, IFAD, the World Bank, UNFPA, and many others. Now, these specialized agencies, programs, and funds act in an independent capacity but fall into the United Nations system, and they are coordinated by the ECOSOC, which is a principal United Nations organ and is tasked for socio-economic development in the first place. It is the ECOSOC which coordinates with these various specialized agencies, programs, and funds. Can you answer this question? The United Nations has dash number of specialized agencies. Is it 18, 14, 15 or 12? The correct answer is 18. Why does the United Nations even need such specialized agencies? Are its own organs not competent or capable enough? Well, they are. However, these organs have a wide array of functions. Often is the case when these organs are overburdened. Since the organs are a core part of the United Nations system, they often fall prey to various political influences and even deadlocks. For this reason, the specialized agencies exist with the primary function of alleviating the burden over the primary organs, and to also ensure that all the important issues receive equal attention. If all the aims of the United Nations and the various issues it wishes to cover are just left to the principal organs, then it will not get enough coverage because of the huge number of aims and issues, and thus few of them will fall out of focus. That is where the specialized agencies like WHO, UNICEF and UNESCO comes in. They work to alleviate this burden from the primary organs of the United Nations and thus make sure that all the issues get equal amount of attention. But these specialized agencies actually act as independent bodies, which means that they have their own version of a charter, their own secretariat, and their own functions and aims. However, they still fall under the wider umbrella or the ambit of the United Nations. This means that they still have to act upon the recommendations and the various principles of the United Nations, and they also have to work under the coordination of the ECOSOC, which is a United Nations primary organ. This, even though they are independent bodies, they eventually are answerable to the United Nations system and the sanctity which the United Nations holds. Another reason why these agencies or even the programs are so important for the United Nations system is because they all have their own respective agendas. and they focus upon a set of issues which they have specialized understanding of. Therefore, this specialized understanding over the set of issues is what the United Nations as a whole lacks, and that is exactly where the specialized agencies and the various programs and funds come in to give this specialized input. Another reason why these agencies are so important for the United Nations system and also act independently is because most of these specialized agencies predate the United Nations itself. You see, they used to exist as independent organizations and independent agencies before the United Nations was even formed. When the UN came in, it decided to bring all of these independent organizations and agencies under its ambit to have a more peaceful and cooperative international community. And that is exactly why they are very important for the United Nations, as it brings in personal, specialized, and experienced inputs to the table. Thus, many of these agencies predate the United Nations itself and, as mentioned, were later absorbed into the organization. Finally, the true importance of the specialized agencies lies in their structure. Due to their compact and flexible nature, along with its specific and dedicated workforce, the agencies manage to have a much wider impact as compared to the traditional core United Nations itself. That is why these specialized agencies, which are independent yet within the ambit of the United Nations system, are so important for the functioning and the impact which the United Nations leaves. Now, there are 18 specialized agencies of the United Nations, but of these, 3 are very important for the socio-economic and cultural development of the world. And these are WHO, or the World Health Organization, UNICEF, or the United Nations Children's Fund, and the UNESCO, or the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. In this lesson, we focus upon the socio-economic and cultural goals of the United Nations. We saw how in that order the United Nations has many specialized agencies. We also realized why there is a need for specialized agencies and how they're important. And then we saw the 3 major specialized agencies of the United Nations: the WHO, the UNICEF, and the UNESCO. In the subsequent lessons, we would be looking at each of these specialized agencies in detail. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at deltastep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers, or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it is rewarding too. So register for free now.